Hello, everybody. We're sitting together with my father, Ariel Berkowitz, reviewing his book, written together with my sweet mother, on Hanukkah. Hanukkah in the Home of the Redeemed, the story of the battle against assimilation. We are a couple days away from Hanukkah, starting this Thursday night, and it's a wonderful opportunity to explore the historical background of the festival and to explore the message as to why do we continue to celebrate a festival that was instituted over 2,000 years ago. You won't find Hanukkah in the Bible, and it is unique to the Jewish people. So what is Hanukkah? What is the history and the important message for which we continue to find inspiration from it? So I am sitting together with you to ask you about your book. How fun. So let's begin with it's a book, so let's begin with the front cover. You chose a picture for the front cover. That's not so usual when we think about Hanukkah. Typically, when we are looking at pictures about Hanukkah or whatever, we usually find a Chanukiah, right? A 9-branched Chanukiah, but not you. You put a picture of a donkey on top of rocky ground with a road in the background, a road on a ridge that's going down into the coastal plain of Israel. What is this picture all about?
Well, you kind of said it a little bit. Everybody who writes something about Hanukkah always puts a picture of a Chanukiah. So I wanted to be different. I wanted something that people would remember. This is a good alternative picture. It was taken by a former professor of mine, and the location is just behind where we used to live in Givat Ze'ev, Israel. It's a picture of the Beit Haron descent or ascent, whichever way you happen to be going. It's a road that was in antiquity, was the main way by which you get to and from Jerusalem to the coastal highway. And so the donkey just happens to be there. He didn't know he was getting his picture taken care of.
Lucky him.
You can see remnants of the ancient road, of the ancient Roman road, which was built on top of the ancient Israelite road. And the reason why this is important is because it was on this road, which was not far from Modi'in, where Hanukkah began. It was on this road that Judah led his army to many significant victories against the Greek Syrians. So I thought it'd be a nice picture for a book about Hanukkah.
Oh, nice. Okay, so you're focusing therefore on the history of what happened, where it happened, and how events unfold, and why is that important for you to focus on the historical foundations of this festival?
It's important to me because I think growing up in a Jewish home, almost every Jewish home focuses on the legend of Hanukkah, which is the miracle of the lights. We'll probably get to that later. And I don't want to focus on something that probably didn't happen. I like to focus on the history because it's the history that gives its significance.
Probably didn't happen, you say?
Yeah.
Miracle of lights probably didn't happen. Those are strong words and not so pleasant words. But as you said, we'll probably get to that later. Yeah, indeed we will. So, but continuing on with a focus on the history, therefore, and I appreciate your integrity, desiring to have a firm foundation on actual events, real people, real places, and real lives. So, and with that in mind, when I read your book, I read you quoting Maccabees. Right? What is Maccabees? What are the historical or the primary sources for reading about this? How do we know about this event?
We know about it largely from 1st and 2nd Maccabees, although a little bit goes into 3rd and 4th Maccabees, but largely 1st and 2nd Maccabees, which were written within 200 years of the actual event itself. And we don't know who wrote it. but these record the entire story. If it wasn't for Maccabees and Josephus, we really wouldn't know much about Hanukkah at all.
So when we open up 1st and 2nd Maccabees, the most important sources for this, we are going to be introduced to a time period when the people of Israel, the Jewish people, are conquered, or they're under the rule of foreign powers. Mm-hmm. Can you tell us a little bit, just in brief, a little bit about that? What is going to be the geopolitical situation, and when are we in history anyway?
Well, you might remember that around in the 6th century, which that's the 500s, before Yeshua, we were taken captive to Babylon by the Babylonians, the Chaldeans, actually. Mm. That didn't last very long. The Bible said it would last 70 years, and it lasted 70 years. Then the Persians came from the east. They conquered Babylon in a day, and we know from the Cyrus Cylinder written by the great Persian King Cyrus that he had a policy of setting captives free and helping them to restore their homeland to them and helping them to rebuild their temples. The Jewish people were part of that policy. And so in the early 6th century, the early 500s, that is, we came home and started building the temple and building the walls of Jerusalem, and everything was looking great. During the next 200 so years, Persia was the dominating ruling kingdom of the Middle East. But they kept picking on the Greeks. And they wanted more and more land, more and more prestige and power. At first, there was some initial success, but after a while, the Greeks began to fight for their homeland and began to overpower the Persians. Then, finally, in the 300s, around 330 thereabouts, Alexander the Great decided to make one great big push westward with his swift and powerful army. And he conquered all of the former Persian Empire, and he moved the Greek Macedonian kingdom all the way to the borders of India in the east, north into the Balkans, north, south down to Egypt. They didn't go west very much.
Yeah, interesting. Why not? Why not go westward? I mean, you got Italy and France, right? How nice is that? Why only eastward? Why is it important to go east and south as far as Egypt and the Persian and Persia?
Well, for one thing, although I'm not completely certain about this, we have a little thing in the west called Rome. And they were rising in power. As Alexander was rising in power, Rome was getting more and more powerful. So it provided a strength that the Greeks just may not have wanted to spend their time on. But they were really, really very bitter and angry at the Persians and wanted to humiliate the Persians.
Right, so humiliating the Persians, while at the same time Persia controlling the landmass that was the area, the regions of the great empires of the past. The Babylonians before the Persians and the Egyptians. These are great and ancient peoples that the Greeks had some great respect for, right?
In addition, yes, you're right. In addition to that, there's a little thing called money, power, prestige. And out of the east came what's called the Silk routes. The main line going from China all the way to the Mediterranean with its trunk lines spreading off north and south. And the Persians made good use of those Silk routes to gain all kinds of riches. The Greeks wanted that too. Whoever controlled the Silk routes controlled all the power and the money. I'm sure that was in Alexander's mind as well.
Yeah, surely. Well, there's one more thing that is important for our focus that I think is good to also make mention of, and that is that Alexander himself was the star student of the philosopher of the day, one of the most famous of philosophers, right?
Mr. Aristotle, huh?
Yeah, right. So if Aristotle, that is so profoundly respected, is the master teacher of Alexander, surely Alexander is going to be highly influenced by Aristotle, right?
Very much so. Alexander was a man with a mission. He wasn't just power hungry or money hungry. He also had a mission. And that mission is called Hellenism and Greek thought. Hellenism is Greek thought, Greek athletics, Greek drama, Greek literature, Greek everything.
So Greek culture.
Yeah.
And also worldview that is embedded in that culture,
And
right?
Aristotelian philosophy, yes.
And one element that I think is important for us is that one of the focuses was the goal of bringing unity over all the peoples. And indeed, there's going to be so many different nations, so many different peoples that were under the rule of the Persians and now are going to find themselves under the rule of the Greeks. And so what is it that's going to bring a unity, a unifying force to the old world now under the new world order of the Greek Empire?
Hellenism.
Yeah. So the spread of this worldview and the philosophy, the syncretism of the Greek world and their gods and the Greek deities, the Greek mythologies. That most nations, most peoples, they will gradually embrace the Greek world. They will embrace Hellenism. They will assimilate into the Greek way of life.
Yeah.
Right? What did it mean to assimilate into the Greek world?
Well, among other things, it meant that you were man-centered. It was a glorification of people, of man, the man's abilities, his power, his body, his mind, and it was actually like a worship of humanism.
Being willing to let go of the old way of doing things, right, in order to adapt to Greek culture, there is an infrastructure that the Greeks will provide, that they will teach the old peoples a new way of doing things, and that one good example of this, perhaps the primary example of this, is going to be the Greek city,
the polis,
yeah. Right? So that with a change of how people live will come about, how people are organized or in an urban environment. A change, an improvement, an upgrading of the practical infrastructure of how people are going to live in a practical manner in the organization of the city.
I think this was a big advantage that the Greeks had. It appealed to people. They did have a better idea about how to organize cities for the betterment of the inhabitants. And that made their philosophy more palatable to the locals.
Right, because it in of itself was philosophy. Right? The what we know as the Hippodamic Plan is named after the philosopher who came up with the notion that the way in which we live together should be orderly. It should be planned. It should be most organized in such a way that will be most convenient for the public. Right, with all the public structures in the center. And then people living their private homes on the outskirts, but everything that is relevant for the public, those structures should be accessible in the center of the city, with the roads that are leading the population in an orderly manner. All right, so it's a philosophy that organizes how to live together in a city, the new urban environment, the new urban culture. So it from that vantage point, from the beginning point, we can see how people experience it being good for them, and therefore, why should we not embrace this new world? It's better than the old world. So you said that this is beginning in the 300s with Alexander's conquest, and you also mentioned Josephus, and I think Josephus is the one who tells us that the Jews were welcoming to the Greeks. So from the point in the 300s where the Jews are welcoming the Greeks, till the events of Hanukkah itself. When is Hanukkah? When is the events of Hanukkah occurring?
Approximately 164, 165 BCE.
Okay, and what was the political and religious change from the beginnings where the Jews are welcoming the Greeks to the events of Hanukkah? What's going on?
Well, you're right. There was a large measure of Jewish population that were welcoming Greek and Hellenism ideas. But Jewish people as we are, we also had a higher goal, a higher God. We had Torah. We had the God of Israel. And there was always a remnant of true believers within Israel. And even though a majority of the nation probably was giving in to Hellenism, and Hellenism, especially around 164, 165 BCE, Hellenism was being forced upon them. They were into it. Things were beginning to happen that I'm sure the assimilated population wasn't really counting on. For example, there rose a ruler called Antiochus Epiphanes IV. He was a cruel man, and he was, of course, a Greek Syrian and wanted to propagate Hellenism. He noticed that there was resistance among the Jewish people, more so than among other people. And he noticed that this resistance centered around God's house in Jerusalem. So in his thinking, if he could control God's house and control what goes on there, then he will stamp out any resistance to Hellenism.
Okay.
And that's what he set about to do during those years. First, he erected a statue of himself there to be worshipped, which was an anathema. And then he ordered pigs to be slaughtered there, which desecrated the whole place.
Right.
And again, there were some Jews that it didn't bother him, unfortunately.
Okay.
But then some were bothered.
Yeah. Okay. So with the legacy of unifying the old world under the new culture and under this new Greek way of life, the one real obstacle to fulfilling that would be the one people group who strongly would resist. Now, on one hand, many Jews, as you said, are going to be embracing, but not those who continue to maintain a purity of worship in the house of God in Jerusalem.
Yeah.
What's different between the Greek temples versus the Jerusalem temple? They are not able to be syncretized one with the other. The other peoples, their religions, their mythologies, the pantheon of their gods, they are able to find some common ground, some parallels between the new gods of Greece, right? So they're able to syncretize the faiths, but the uniqueness of the people of Israel, the one living God who has no image and is not tied to any one element, whether it be the sun or the seas or whatever. The God of Israel is the creator of the heavens and earth who has made covenant with his people. Yeah. And you can't syncretize that concept with the Greek world.
Right.
So the Jews or the people of Israel are the one real resistance to this, to the inability to unify all under one system.
Now, from you're right. From Antiochus' point of view, if the Jews were just in some far-off corner of that world, it would be one thing. They wouldn't really be noticed. But God just happened to put the Jewish people in the land of Israel as a land bridge between Europe, Asia, and Africa.
Okay.
And everybody who traveled between those three continents had to pass through the land. And they would notice the resistance to Greek-Syrian rule, the resistance to Hellenism. People passing through would notice and get the idea, well, maybe we could rebel too. Maybe we could resist just like these Jews. And
in resistance, well, there's the observation of the Israelite worldview, the Israelite spirituality or faith in their God as opposed to the one God as opposed to the many. In the many options of the many gods that you can worship, you don't have this one option that of faith in one living God who is the creator and who is king over Israel and seeks to provide justice for all nations, not just his covenant people. So I see there's a certain removal of this choice. Right? Instead of having a civilizational debate, he is imposing and removing that option.
Yeah.
So, okay, so he defiles, as you said, the house of God in Jerusalem, and for the first time in history, the Jewish faith or the biblical faith, the faith of Israel, is going to be made or rendered illegal. Right? The Jewish people are not allowed to continue to practice their biblical faith, into which their identity, their national identity, is tied into and defined. Right?
And you're right, and it extended far beyond just what happens in God's house in Jerusalem.
Okay.
No Torah, which means that you couldn't circumcise, the holidays were not permitted to be celebrated. Every aspect of Torah life was off limits to the people of Judah.
In the removal of the practice of Torah, this surely is the catalyst that provided the opportunity for certain Israelites to respond in a way that's different than up till now. Up until now, there is a gradual increase of the influence of Hellenism amongst the Jewish people and embrace, but nobody's really fighting against it, right?
That's the problem. That's why we name our book "The Battle Against Assimilation." Before Solomon's temple was destroyed, probably the main problems of our people were worshiping like the Canaanites and forsaking covenant living and mistreating each other. Well, that wasn't so much of a problem as assimilation became in the Second Temple period. Assimilation, especially during this time period, was the problem.
Okay. And so what is the fundamental threat that assimilation offered, or the assimilation opposed?
Well, there's two kinds of assimilation. There's a good kind and there's not so good kind. The good kind is if you are Russian and you want to go live in Tahiti, well, you probably want to learn the Tahitian language, maybe dress like a Tahitan and eat Tahiti foods. And you do those cultural things to kind of blend in. That's okay, and that's expected. And then people do that all the time. The bad kind is when you do that and you sacrifice what makes you a person as a person. You sacrifice your values and your standards to be like a Tahitan.
Okay.
So apply that to Israel. That's sacrificing Torah values. It's sacrificing who you are as a descendant of Jacob. That's the wrong kind of assimilation, and that's what was taking place.
Okay, so it's the difference between integrating into a new society, while maintaining personal identity of your heritage, of where have you come from, who are you, and what is the distinct characteristic of your faith that it plays out into your lifestyle while integrating into the greater society. All right, so the difference then between integrating and assimilating is what you're describing.
Yeah, the best modern example of it probably is during World War II, where there were German Jews and Jewish people lived in Poland right next to Germany. In Poland was probably the most religious of all the Jewish population in Europe. Germany, on the other hand, was probably the most assimilated of all the Jewish population. They took more pride in speaking German and looking like Germans and talking like Germans and thinking like Germans than they did as Jewish people. And the irony of the whole thing is that when the Holocaust came, there was a Polish Jew and a German Jew sharing the same bunk together. Where did it get them? The Polish Jew could suffer through that but hold his head high because he kept his values. The German Jew forsook his values as a Jew. and it got him nowhere.
So it didn't save his life as a German.
Exactly.
Okay. And so in doing so, there was the loss of the heritage and identity that stretched back thousands of years,
Yes.
and gave an eternal purpose, in that the identity of Israel is tied into faith in God, who is covenanted to Israel, and gave a specific mandate to the people of Israel to be the source of God's blessing upon all nations, that all nations should be blessed through you.
I would say those are some of the key issues of the Hanukkah story.
Okay, so the question of recognizing to what extent is our integration into the new world, an assimilation in which we are losing who we are, our fundamental identity.
Yeah.
And so it's okay to change the way we build a city. All right, maybe it's going to even be better. Maybe we can fulfill the purpose of God more effectively. Even it's okay, even maybe to change the way I dress.
Right.
But is it okay to? But then the question will be, what is it not okay to change in my dress and in how I live and how I think and how I behave? Where do we draw the line?
Well, the essential element of Jewish society, the bottom line of Jewish society, should have been Torah, the Word of God, and living according to its principles and its teachings. If you build a city or dress like if you build a city like Greeks and dress like Greeks, you're right, it's okay. But when it begins to compromise biblical teaching and you live according to Greeks, not according to the Bible, then it becomes a big, big problem.
Okay, and the Bible it has detail as to how to live, from everything from how you eat to how you dress.
Yeah.
And that's why I think I hear the question mark in your tone about it's maybe okay to dress like Greeks, right? And I emphasize that because I think there's going to be, as a result of this story, different Jewish groups or groups amongst Israel that are going to have a difference of opinion on how to apply the biblical commands in such a way that is either modern and integrated or maintaining a purity to the past. This is going to be an ongoing question, I think, for the people.
Even in today's world. Yeah.
That's why I think it's so relevant, because till today, this is still, these are still the questions that we are all asking ourselves and debating with one another. But for the story of Hanukkah, there were the story given to us in Maccabees gives one specific act that was considered to be the ultimate crossing of the line that there's no debate over. What's that?
Well, in every town and village in Judah, Israel, if you would, Antiochus set up an image, I think, of himself or one of the Greek gods, and forced people to go and bow down before it and worship it. Many people did. About 20 miles northwest of Jerusalem was a little town called Modi'in. And in that particular town, when it came time to put up that statue and people being forced to worship it, some Jews began to go forward, and there was a priest there with 5 sons. The priest was called Mattityahu, and as soon as he saw someone started to go forward, there was a biblical story that he had in mind. In the book of Numbers, chapter 25, some Israelites began to adopt the gods of the Moabites and do sinful things in front of the tabernacle. And so Pinchas took a spear and drove it right through an Israelite and a Moabite woman who were doing wrong things at the tabernacle. Mm. He tried to preserve the integrity of that place, the holiness of the place. With that story in mind, Mattityahu did the same thing. He rose up and killed the person who bowed down to the statue.
Okay, so the act of killing was not Jews killing Greeks, but rather Jews against Jews.
Isn't that interesting?
Right. And over the question of the integrity of worship of God.
Yeah.
To not bow the knee to any foreign or false deity.
Yeah.
Because that is the fundamental and the pinnacle, both together. That if we change that, we are lost.
Yeah.
And indeed, it is you can even find a historical secular justification for that principle, and that all the other peoples that would bend the knee to syncretize their gods with the Greek gods, in their assimilation, they're lost to history.
Yeah.
The one people group who will resist, not fight against the Greeks at first, but fight against themselves, each other, and then against the Greeks who will continue to impose the death penalty, will be the people of Israel, who would maintain the purity of worship of the Lord your God and not bending the knee to any other.
Yep.
So this is there's many things that we Jews continue to debate over as to what degree of assimilation is actually integration and good, or what degree of integration is actually assimilation and not good. But this is the fundamental that we need not debate over, and that is faith in God and not worshiping any other. Mm-hmm. And that is fundamental. So the fighting then will spread again from that point onwards, led by Mattathieu, his 5 sons of the Hasmonean family. They lead the battle against then the Greeks.
They rebelled. They rebelled against the command by the Greek Syrians to worship the way that they said they should, and that began a rebellion. The rebellion wasn't something that took place on an open battlefield at first. The odds were against us. This family, the Hasmonean family, took to guerrilla warfare to harass the Greek Syrian army that was sent to enforce the rules. But more and more people joined the Jewish army. And eventually there were open battles where the Jews did get the upper hand.
Okay.
Which was incredibly, in my opinion, one of the biggest miracles of the Hanukkah story.
Okay. Because otherwise we can understand, coming back to the picture you choose here, with guerrilla warfare on these ridges, right? These ridges are not made, it's not conducive for the Greek tank. the phalanx doesn't work as well on this landscape than the Jewish method of fighting. But if it was limited to this, then secular historians would say, well, there's not anything unusual about this. It's a better tactic.
Yeah.
But it's not limited to just this landscape, as you said, in the open field for open warfare, where the unstoppable phalanx will be stopped. I mean, the phalanx was able to defeat the superior Persian army, arguably, but inferior due to the Greek method, the phalanx and the way in which they conducted their warfare, the idea by which to fight, will fail against the Jewish people, and we don't have any good explanation for that.
Judah had a good explanation. It's found in 1 Maccabees.
Okay.
As Judah, when he was fighting on this road here and other places throughout the land, Judah wasn't always victorious, but when he did win, it records his prayers that he said when he beat the Greeks. He thanked God. He acknowledged that it was God and God alone that gave him the victory. That was the secret weapon that the Jews had that the Greeks didn't.
The confidence that the covenanted God will remain faithful.
Yeah.
And in our choice to fight to remain loyal to the covenant, we are empowered by the living God who is covenanted to us.
Exactly.
And therefore victory on the battlefield, because it wasn't just to fight against the Greeks. It wasn't a geopolitical struggle. It was a struggle for survival of the testimony of the name of God in Israel. And therefore, to enable a continuation of the light of the testimony of God amongst the nations. From the military victory, the Jewish people are going to be enabled to eventually also take control of Jerusalem. And coming into the house of God in Jerusalem, they'll tear their clothes of grief of what what the Greeks had done to this place, but then commit themselves to the cleaning and the rebuilding and the repairs, the building of a new altar that then would be dedicated unto worship. Not a repairing of it, but a new altar.
Which is what the word Hanukkah means, dedication or rededication.
So therefore, that is the focus of this festival, is a rededication of one's personal life together with all of Israel for the worship of God and the dedication of the altar of worship.
Yeah.
All right, so I love how precise and succinct you are in the history here in your book, and then the instruction that you provide for how to practice the celebration, the traditional blessings. You have them all written here in Hebrew and in transliteration and in translation. You give wonderful explanation as to how to practically celebrate from within Jewish tradition, but then you also include something that is unique, I think, based on some kind of tradition where there is a traditional reading of scripture during this period, but you expand this reading into an actual study discussion. And for each day you give theme and you give questions that can be asked, and I think that's really wonderful. Together with games, food, songs, and crafts, how to make your own Hanukkah. And there's one thing that we didn't come back to, and that is the Hanukkah itself. Remembering the rabbinic legend of the miracle of lights.
I have time.
You have time?
Yeah, let's do it.
What is that? Why did you say that it is a legend? Thank you for watching and listening to this discussion with my father, my teacher, Ariel Berkowitz. If you would like to listen to the remainder of this video, you are welcome to join us at patreon.com. Just type in my name, Yoel Berkowitz, and join my library tier, accessing this and many more conversations and biblical series of teachings. If you are interested in purchasing this book, Hanukkah in the Home of the Redeemed, by Ariel and Devorah Berkowitz, to aid in your celebration of Hanukkah this year, it is available either on their website, TorahTruths.com, where more of their wonderful biblical teachings are available, or at Amazon.com. If you would like to become a student of Ariel Berkowitz, you can also enroll in the online school Torah Resource Institute, together with other wonderful and godly professors. You can find all the links in the details below.